So let's come on to, I want to chat to you about the reason I invited you over.
Okay.
The main reason.
Right.
And thank you to Dave Davis for the introduction, which is mega. So, Verenigma, right? And if I were you, I'm going to explain what Verenigma is by reading off the website.
Okay.
Verenigma, Daedalus? Daedalus?
Yeah, Daedalus or whatever.
Daedalus.
Yeah.
Okay. Verenigma Daedalus is a mobile app service which provides insight into your mental health. Your data is uploaded to our system minute by minute to help you understand the factors influencing your mental state throughout the day. Our users can use the information to understand their own emotional state and take steps to turn things around before things start to deteriorate. Verenigma is designed to help users to self-manage their mental health far more effectively. Now, before I ask you about this, how this came about, Mr. Barrister, environmental scientist, chef, now Verenigma founder, right?
Yeah.
What I like, when we were talking on the phone about this, what I liked about this is there was a certain thing that pricked my ears up with it when we were talking, which first came on our radar in terms of a need for it. Talking to Mandy Bostwick, who I mentioned to you, number 99, we were talking about mental health. And one of the important things that is especially lacking in the military, or was at the time of that conversation, it's not lacking in certain areas, it still is in most at the moment, is baselining mental health. Baselining people's mental state with the reason that then you can detect fluctuations in the mental health. And I'll analogize it for the situation I got going on at the moment is I need to have a blood test to check for I may be ill or maybe not in a certain way. And I happen to have had a blood test last year, so I have got a baseline. I know where my bloods are in a good at a good level. Before that, I don't think I've got anything. So in this next blood test, there is a baseline. My GP will measure me against my healthy me a year ago.
Yep.
I may still be healthy now. I hopefully am.
Yeah.
But the check. One of the things this tool can be used for is baseline. I'm going to stop now. Verenigma. Talk to me about Verenigma, please, Quinton.
Do you want a quick plotted history? Or
Do it.
you want...
100%.
Okay. The reason why this even got to where we are right now, and I didn't plan on doing this, was that back in 2008, do you remember the Mid-Staffordshire Hospital scandal?
Vaguely, but remind me.
Basically, 1,500 people died in hospital who shouldn't have done.
Over what time period?
About a couple of years. Bad management, bad care, the whole shit show. And I read the public inquiry, the Francis report, and I analysed it both from my legal perspective and from my science point of view. And the thing that seemed to... my reduction of that big report was that basically it was clear that no one had control over the information. The way the information was produced was actually the biggest flaw in the game, is that all care is basically, I'm looking after you, I the person looking after you, write my report and mark my own work. That's the problem. So as a consequence, in that area of that hospital, nothing proper got written down or went all the way through to be managed. All just became information and then massaged along the way for various reasons. So I thought, well, in order to be able to stop that, you needed to produce different kinds of evidence to be able to be... Well, I thought, what would I want to do if I was putting evidence into court? And from my perspective, I came up with 5 criteria, and it was as follows. One, that the evidence had to be produced independently. It can't be me writing, I was really good today. It's saying something else was doing it. But it was real time, it was contemporaneous with the event that you're seeking to describe in evidence. That it was measurable. It's not just yes or no, but it was, anywhere between 0 and 10 or something like that. So how severe or how good or whatever. Then the third one, it's reproducible evidence. It's reliable. And then the fifth one, is that it's usable in the environment that you're actually operating in. And then it took me about 3 years to work out that our voice is directly controlled by our perceptions. You can disguise what you're saying, but you can't hide them. Or you can hide, but you can't disguise. The point is that your voice is controlled by the anterior cingulate cortex, which in the brain you've got a number of different networks, which all interchange at the anterior cingulate cortex. That's default mode networks, like when you lie back like this, that's default mode network. When you bring to my attention, you go, that's my salience network kicking in, and those switches all occur in this little part of the brain of just the ACC. But it's also where chronic pain arises. It's also where anxiety arises. The neuronal activation, literally the neurons, is happening right there. and we can pick it up through the sound of the voice because it's controlling the voice. So we then got I got a load of computer scientists to be able to separate out your voice and my voice, because I'm trying to get this model of care in a closed environment. So we need to be able to pick up your voice and my voice simultaneously, so we can separate out what's going on, and then work out, say, if you're stressing me out, it will come out in my voice that, my voice is getting more stressed. And therefore you can tell the difference between good, bad and ugly care, because you obviously don't want the last two, you want the first one. And one way of being able to, the litmus test for the suitability of the care would be how I'm interacting with you. So that if it's good care, there won't be any great deal of anxiety. There might be some background stuff, because obviously I'm an anxious person or whatever, but it's not increasing just as as I turn up on the scene. And that way you can rank care. So if you've got 5 people looking after your mum coming in and out during the day, and she's a bit gaga, then you can see whether, if she's okay with one, carers 1, 2, and 3, but 4 and 5 she's going like that, you might think, well, let's intervene. Let's see, change the order, change things around. So that was the thinking behind it. Having achieved the sort of computational mathematics behind that, which wasn't as tricky as you might think, but wasn't trivial either. We then started trying it out with people, and then one of my friends who's got bad chronic pain, called Kippo, he gets shooting pains from an accident he had many years ago. I mean, it's crippling stuff. And he said, Quinton, it's picking up on my chronic pain. I thought, what the hell's all that about? And it's through this that I then expanded.
He said what?
The system is picking up on my chronic pain.
Through his voice?
Yes. So I couldn't even.
In what way?
Because the system was picking up on when he had higher levels of chronic pain. It was just registering on the system.
And he was just talking normally.
Yeah, well, he was going. See, Quinton, I'm noticing, because he used it for about 3 or 4 months. He said, Quinton, this is what's happening. I thought, that's really interesting. And we were filtering. Basically, what the system did is that through a microphone on the mobile telephone, we can pick up your voice. We take a small snippet of your voice, and we can analyze it for various different things. And how the system trains itself onto the features that we're interested in is that we get a whole load of voices who are anxious, or a load of voices that are depressed, or a whole load of voices with minor cognitive impairment, or those with chronic pain. And we filter them, essentially, and then we apply our system to be able to pick up these very small signal processing signals, which are identified with those particular neuropsychiatric disorders.
So to understand, in order to identify what the markers are in the audio from the voice, you will get people who for example, are depressed.
Bingo.
100, 1,000, sample them and go, okay, this is the commonality in their voices across the board. This is the marker for depression that we should be looking for.
That's it.
Okay, go on. So what can you identify then?
We could do anxiety, depression, chronic pain, minor cognitive impairment, which is that on the slow road to dementia, emotional exhaustion, which is a subdivision of alexithymia. Alexithymia nobody knows about, but it's a thing where quite often what happens is alexithymia is the inability to read your own emotions, which is quite often afflicts autistic people, for instance. And people who've got traumatic brain injuries get acquired alexithymia, whereby you are unable to just...
What's that word?
Alexithymia, ALX, which is blindness to your own emotions.
Okay.
Now, it's analysed using a 20 questionnaire thing. It's a self-report exercise. But we actually did that filtration approach using one of the subdomains of what this alexithymia is comprised of, which is inability to differentiate your own emotions, or to identify your own emotions, or to differentiate, or to gain a perspective. These are done through questions. We took the first aspect, which was the inability to distinguish one's own emotions in the first case, and therefore took those people, which is the main part of the game, to see to the extent to which they are emotionally exhausted. There's other sets of questions you could ask, because emotional exhaustion is often comorbid with chronic pain. You're just like flaked out the whole time by the constant subjective bombardment of your own sense of pain and distress of it. The use of the word emotional exhaustion isn't used in the lexicon of medical dictionaries at the moment, because it is to some extent, but it's very much on the periphery. It's not used when people say, well, what's your chronic pain level? Say, well, it's about 8 or whatever, they say, and they give you various, and you get given drugs for that within that context. What we've found is that we asked a whole lot of people who've got chronic pain. These were veterans as well. These were US veterans, and we did some UK ones as well. Whether the word emotional exhaustion was a useful expression as a part of their experience of chronic pain, as opposed to saying, I've got chronic pain. And over 90% of them said yes, it was either useful or very useful.
What's the significance of that?
It means that we've possibly got a new indicator which can be quite useful in this respect. What we've found out is that emotional exhaustion, in terms of the system that we can use to measure changes in the neurophysiological neuronal activation that's going on in the anterior cingulate cortex, is that those with emotional exhaustion have a neuronal deactivation, there's bugger all going on. A healthy person's neurophysiological profile will have lots of activity, lots of variability, and that's all, it's nice. It's all nice in the garden, so to speak. But when you get significant, severe conditions of either, say, depression or anxiety or combination thereof, because quite often these things actually present themselves not on their own, but together. And this is particularly true of veterans. Something like in the American experience, there's a much higher incidence of those presenting with all three, like getting a bloody royal flush of problems, not just one. So consequently, the ability to measure these simultaneously and see what's driving what is actually one of the aspects that we're looking to be able to achieve in this clinical trials we're undertaking very shortly.
Sorry, so the three being
depression, anxiety, and chronic pain.
Depression, anxiety, and chronic pain. Okay, all right, yeah. For the minor cognitive impairment,
yes.
How did you discover the marker for that?
Same process, filtrating people who'd already been labelled with minor cognitive impairment.
How accurate was their diagnosis?
It's not that great. That's the problem. But on the other hand, because it's either a yes or a no, the problem with minor cognitive impairments is it fluctuates. It comes and goes. What happens is the general prevalence of it, when you get older, you get a bit forgetful and all the rest of it. That can be just general aging. When it moves into minor cognitive impairments, where there's a stronger element of a persistent features, what happens, you can move into cognitive impairment in your mid-60s or whatever, and you can stay in that level of impairment. Or you can go, it carries on down into dementia. After a period of time, a good cohort do move into dementia.
We're talking things like short-term memory is very poor, or the ability to add up simple figures is difficult.
About 3 different ways it's looked
Nothing
at.
that's majorly impacting you, but you're a bit of a moron in certain areas now.
Exactly,
you weren't before.
And then sometimes your minor cognitive impairment can get better again. So that's what makes it so difficult to actually bloody detect it in the first case, because it's sometimes there and sometimes not. And of course, if you change the framework of thinking of how you're analysing this thing, so instead of looking at one single data point, which is normally, how am I feeling today, doctor? Well, not that great, or whatever it is. You've got multiple data points that you can see intradaily, interdaily, interweekly, and so on and so forth. You get quite a different picture. And therefore you can see what you should be doing within a particular range of things, whether or not to intervene, at what threshold, and so forth. So we can get much more significant information, which is much more useful than what we've presently got, which is normally a mini-cog test, or I can't remember what the tests are called now, but essentially it's a question of could you do this? Can you count a clock backwards and this kind of stuff, which gives a bit of stress on the brain, and those who, and those things are reasonably accurate up to about 70%. 70-75% is the usual level of reproducible results. With our system, we've already got an accuracy levels somewhere in those features, just around there or just above that, and that's just on very limited amounts of data that we've actually acquired so far. We trained and tested the system on, I think, about 116 people who had minor cognitive impairment, and we achieved those levels of accuracy. We're going to get some more voices shortly where we'll be able to achieve, because the system is goes in such a way, the more data you throw at it, the more it self-tunes. So we're looking prospectively to have a screener for minor cognitive impairment, and this has 2 particular applications given where we are today, and a rugby club with its juniors playing outside, is that, and we know that it's been in the papers recently about the number of these famous rugby players now getting early dementia, going that down long road into darkness, is that people want to be able to know when to stop. We could produce a screener that you can have on your phone. So when you get a series of concussion, things like that, and you start developing a certain marginal amount of minor cognitive impairment, that's your time to stop, isn't it? Because what generally happens with minor cognitive impairment, it goes so far down the line, by the time it's detected, it's already too late. and then you just got to make your will and all the rest of it. And then the other part, apart from the sports side of things, which is contact sports like American football, and the English version as well, is that in the military situation, those who've had combat exposure, either through direct or indirect traumatic brain injury, have the issue that basically their brain's been shaken up, and sometimes it doesn't go back to normal. We know we have the various other descriptors of PTSD, plus those who've got traumatic brain injury, quite often higher incidence of PTSD and so on and so forth, is that 12%, this is an adventitious study done by the Veterans Administration in 2018. They did about 500 soldiers, median age about 48 to 50, middle-aged guys who've been in for 20 years, 10 years or whatever it was. A full 12% of those tested had minor cognitive impairment. That is huge. You normally only find that cohort by the time you get to 70.
What was the average age of this group?
About 48 to 50. And the median is about 52 or something like that. So these guys they've got the damage. Now, what do you do about it? But you don't know which ones they are. Then no one's going to spend a load of money trying to find out which is it, you or you or you. But with this system, we could actually provide a means of going back to your original point, baseline. You want baseline before and then take it on from there. Because there's no reason, because this stuff is cheap. The brilliant thing is everyone's got a bloody telephone. And consequently, you can intervene early, because there's certain things you can do with minor cognitive impairment which have certain beneficial effects. But you might be able to change the trajectory. I'm not saying you will, but it's put this way, unless you know about it, you ain't going to be able to do anything about it. As simple as that. Consequently, the urgency of this is already well recognised both by the British government and by the US government. The NIH, which is the research facility that shoves lots of money at things to get results, and the NIHR in the UK both asked last year for a screener for minor cognitive impairment. And it was at that point I told my computer bods, Sam and Akachaki, and so I said, we've got it, we've done it. And we fulfilled the criteria for an NIHR submission. They'll give us some money, and I was quite happy reasonably with the contractual aspects. But that fell to pieces in January this year for one reason or another. Sai decided to pull out, but that was his prerogative, so anyhow. But at that point I realised that the whole process of validating for commercial use certification of these systems in the UK is actually fairly complex and very expensive. This commercialisation process was going to do is going to cost 1.8 million. I thought, and also there was a very odd thing that was said to me, it was an off-cuff remark by one of the academics at a subsequent meeting I had with some other academics saying, and it seemed to me there was very much a closed shop. Those who've already got the money get more money. If you haven't had any money, you don't get any money. And that was fine. That's pretty much normal common and garden stuff in its own way. But from my perspective, I thought I want to go off to America and get it done there because it's much more transparent. You can go down a particular route. If you've got a new application and it needs a new classification, they will do it in a certain time frame, blah, 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 at a certain cost or recognisable limits to it, shall we say. And that's why I started pursuing this route into America to get it certified there first of all. And it was through meeting somebody who was my Sherpa to take me through that quite difficult bureaucratic set of administrative decision making that we then discussed, well, we need a partner in the United States. And he suggested the Veterans Administration. And it was through that, I said, that's a good shout. And it's through that I then came across all this extra stuff and its application within the veteran or military context, which I had really not precluded, but had really seen that as a side issue to looking after the elderly, which is my original proposition. Such that with that, but then with the closer I got to the Veterans Administration, because they were actually offering tons of money for people to come up with new ideas about being able to control people who've got suicidal ideation, which of course is one of the running themes of guys who leave the military and in the military itself.
Interesting thing I read on that recently was that I can't remember where I read it, but that suicidal ideation is actually pretty common amongst most people.
It's not as uncommon as you'd like to think.
Yeah, pretty common amongst most people in terms of they think about it, but to no depth. To no depth.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which surprised me. But sorry. So I interrupted there.
No,
I have got a couple of questions for you.
Go for it. Do it now.
All right. So you know that at the moment the do you want to call it the app? Call it the app? Is that what you call it?
Yeah.
You know, at the moment that Verenigma, the app, can detect anxiety. Go on, what was it?
Chronic pain, depression, the usual
Anxiety, chronic
it's
pain,
a matrix
depression.
of things that just generally present together.
Yeah, okay.
And emotional exhaustion as well.
And emotional exhaustion as well. All right, so 2 questions. How accurate is it at predicting those, and how many instances of misdiagnosis are there?
What you use is, there's, in medical terms, you use the word sensitivity and specificity. And those 2 words, I always get confused which way around they are.
Okay.
Basically, it's the degree to which you're creating false positives and false negatives. Either, when you say there's something, there's not actually something there, and when there should, and so on. So at that level, we hit about 75% across the piece in both aspects, of both sensitivity and specificity. Because quite often you'll get a situation, you can accurately predict that you're getting it right when it's there, but you're not getting it right when it's not there. Are you not saying it's not correctly saying it's not there when it's not there?
So you can say it's 75% accurate.
Both sides, yeah, both sides of that game. Now that's quite, that's what we've got at the moment, which I think is pretty okay, because when you look at, when you go to see a doctor, they know better than 50% in getting it right with analysing whether you've got depression or not, because there's a lot more.
Until there's level 2, level 3 care, right?
Yeah. So anyhow, I'm not here to knock professional help, etc. at all, far from it. But what the consideration is on a suicidal ideation things, when I started investigating this, thinking, well, we might be able to help with that, because we know that these are very much precursors of, people who've got chronic pain are doubly likely to have suicidal ideation. If you're exhausted, fatigue is directly related to having suicidal ideation and suicide attempts. So if you can reduce the amount of chronic pain, the antecedents to that, you might be able to disentangle some of the suicidal ideation, is my theory. Now, on that basis, we are now at the stage of, the clinical trials we're doing, this is for certification in the US, is twofold. One is we've got to say what the thing does on the lid, which is, are we accurate in the assertion of the statistics that I've just given to you? Secondly, on the suicidal ideation side, what we're doing, we're getting, we've got about 45 veterans at the moment. Not all of them got suicidal ideation. So on the basic certification of the system, does it do what it says, which is do the chronic pain? Can it manage it? Can we derive causal relationships? Is it the chronic pain which is driving the depression, or is it depression driving the chronic pain and the anxiety? We can do that with some rather clever maths, even though we don't know the causal structure at present. There's some maths that we can do on the data to be able to appreciatively give direction on a causal basis to that.
Is that based on whichever signal is strongest?
Essentially, yes. Or the relationship, how often they interrelate at what particular point, we can actually derive that, yes. That's what we're saying.
What about, how does medication play into it?
That remains to be seen, but it strikes me that a lot of the masking of pain, for instance, is one, like when you have a headache, you take some aspirin or whatever it might be, or something stronger. Those mask the pain. There's the neuroreceptors, which stops the transmission of certain neuronal activation. And I'm treading on sort of way outside my competence levels. So the first thing to say on that one is that nonetheless, if you might be suffering, probably people suffer from chronic pain, even when they're not suffering from it, they're suffering from it because there's side issues to the exercise of it which change their whole behaviour. They get fearful of doing things because they anticipate chronic pain coming back. And therefore they'll change and that creates a sense of oppression and anxiety. So if you're a doctor, you think, Christ, I've got to deal with this anxiety as well as depression, as well as the chronic pain. Which one do I do first? If the person who's trying to manage their own pain says, well, actually, I know that the biggest driver of my chronic pain is the alexithymia caused by the emotional exhaustion, because that drives the intensity of the suffering I actually feeling. Therefore, if I can reduce the alexithymia or the emotional exhaustion, then I'm halfway to reducing the amount of chronic pain I'm suffering. This friend of mine, Kippo, who was taking drugs, he had bags of the stuff to keep his body in check, so to speak.
Kippo, he sounds like a rugby player with that nickname. Is he a rugby player?
Not any longer.
Kippo.
I think he got it because he was actually fell asleep behind a bar all the time.
I'm picturing a 6'3", second row English schoolboy. Am I right?
Well,
Kippo?
It's not quite that. He used to be a coxer in the rowing things.
I should have said that.
He's a lot smaller, but he's got a lot bigger.
I just described my dad as well. I haven't just realised. Just described my dad. Exactly. Yeah, go on.
Anyhow, so he said that when he started using the system, because he was got lots of painkillers and things like that, and some of them are real mind numbers, He said that he could reduce the amount of pain pills he had to take because of using the system. He was more in control.
Explain how. Go on.
He found, it's one of those strange things that we found about the system. So this is my friend Kip. I've known him for 30 years, and he was using it because he's a bit geeky and all the rest of it. And he said, "I'll have a go at this, Quint." And one of the things he said, "Quinton, I've managed to reduce my number of pills I have to take for pain, which are at the highest level, opioid type stuff, etc., by a third or something, something like that." And I thought, "Oh, that's great, well done." I'm not thinking a huge amount about it, except I'm just glad it's working for you. But then when I looked into it further about when we did the analysis, that we found when people using the system, it reduced the severity of their anxiety and depression quite significantly, albeit at a lower level. We thought, well, why is that happening? Because we haven't done anything. You're just using the system.
So they're using it just to see, where am I at? What is affecting me?
That's it.
They're not going, to the doctor and say, here's a drama. They're just using the system.
Just to check in.
So they're more aware of what's going
situation.
on. Okay,
that's about it. You think, okay, that's nice to know,
Yeah.
But what was actually happening was actually reducing the symptoms. And I thought, well, what the hell's that coming from? Anyhow, I then spent a year just trying to understand all these things, which I can now talk about to you. Because one thing I can do as an ex-lawyer and things like this, I can chunk huge amounts of information. I've read more on this subject than probably anybody, full stop. Because I've had to go beyond the disciplines that everybody else tends to stick within, in the silo, etc. Anyhow, there's a guy called Professor Gross at Stanford, who's done a lot of work in looking at the way people perceive that, when you're sitting quiet, you can say, I'm not in pain, I can feel my body, I know where I'm at, I'm in this room, blah, blah, blah. And your sense of interior awareness is what he's tend to focus in on. What we do as a part of emotional regulation, this comes back to the larger point about PTSD, people with PTSD and things like that, is the inability to regulate your own emotions. You go like that. And then what he found is that people sometimes adopt strategies to try to control their situation better. Sometimes it's successful, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's a maladjustment in such a way that the very things they think they're doing to help them actually make it even worse. That can also happen. And one of the things they do is that part of the exercise and their theoretical thing is that you actually have this thing called affect labeling. I'm feeling a bit tense or like this. What is it? What am I feeling? I'm scared? Yeah, okay, I'm scared. What am I going to do about this to stop feeling scared? And it's that little conscious added, approach which helps is beginnings of your processing of your emotions at a conscious level. And that's an explicit emotional regulation. But there's also what's called implicit emotional regulation, which is just carrying on with your normal day. But the way you choose to do things actually has a good effect upon your general sense of well-being. There's nothing particularly new in that, potentially. But there's also the thing is that when people say, how am I feeling at the moment? I'm feeling okay. I'm feeling a bit distressed. I'm a bit sad about that. People who've got acquired alexithymia, you can be born with it as well. And a lot of autistic people have this inability to read their own emotions. They just feel, I'm anxious. That's about it. That's all they can work out. They have much narrow bandwidth. But you can also get that acquired through traumatic brain injury as well, which was mentioned earlier. Now, one of the things that interacting with the system does is it creates what's called implicit affect labeling. I'm not saying to myself, I'm feeling anxious, but I've just said, I clock in on the thing and I see those little bar charts and I've got my anxieties there, my depression's there, or chronic pain's there. I am visually looking at that and I'm clocking what my own interior awareness is. But the very affect processing that takes place, that interaction, has an effect of actually increasing the affective processing that takes place in the situation between the anterior the insular, the prefrontal cortex, and the anterior cingulate cortex at the same time. So it has just this little process has an effect of reducing increases the connectivity between those things which are functionally quite often disconnected to a greater degree with people suffering from those conditions. And therefore you're reintroducing a better situation through that process. This affect labeling. That's why I'm less distressed than I was yesterday, kind of thing. Helps you to, gear yourself in better. Cue yourself in, tune yourself in, should we say? And I think that's what it does, and I think that's what we've got. So that's what we're trying to do now with these guys who we're doing the clinical trials with, to see how effective, to what extent that is really. It really works. Secondly, we've asked them what would you consider to be the minimal improvement you would accept in your situation for chronic pain? So you've got some people who are chronic pain level 2 and some people chronic pain level 8. Now, of course, 10% of 8 is a hell of a lot more than 10% of 2. But we found that everybody right across that, the whatever levels, they thought a 30% increase in improvement would be considered to be the minimal improvement that they would consider to be meaningful for them. So I thought, okay, that's quite a high bar. So we're going to find
30%.
30%. Or so I thought, okay, let's see if we can do that. So that's what we're trying to do. See if that does have that thing which we say, that increase in emotional regulation has resultant effects of reduction of chronic pain or of anxiety or of depression. Moving slightly sideways to the suicidal ideation thing, because this is another key element which we were seeking to address originally by going to America, because the Veterans Administration wanted to find some answers to the suicidal ideation problem, any problem, because as we know, more guys and girls are committing suicide back at home than have died on the battlefields of the past 25 years. You know, it's 6,000 a year are killing themselves. So you add up the figures for Afghanistan, Iraq, 1, 2, 3 or whatever, you'll see there's a whole lot less. And the degree of people who are killing themselves are right across the age groups, from Vietnam veterans all the way up to the youngsters who are just coming out now. Now, the suicidal ideation thing we're doing is that because we can measure neuronal changes within the day, not just, you come in on a Thursday and you come in next Thursday, etc. There's a guy who's a very big specialist on suicidal stuff called Kleiman, Professor Kleiman at Rutgers University. And he's done this thing called measuring people's changes in their fluctuations of their mental state prior to suicidal attempts or suicidal ideation. And what happens, what I've seen from the stuff that he's got, is that when people have this suicidal episode, it isn't like, it gets boom, that's it, I'm out of here kind of thing. What seems to happen, I've seen, is that I'm seeing the episode, I'll give it over to you, you may want to give us a link, something like that, is that people actually suddenly feel better, and then they crash. So it's that crash which is the I can't cope any longer bit, that meow. So if we can pick up those neurophysiological changes which correspond to that thing and model it. So what we've got is on the app, we've got people who are going to be using the system. Some are going to be able to be interacting and getting feedback. So we know we've got the control lot who are no feedback, so we can see the difference between the two. And then on the suicidal ideation, when someone who we know has got suicidal thoughts, tendencies or whatever, they have a little button and they press that when they have a suicidal episode. And in fact, we do it on a slider, because sometimes you can have little passive sort of things, well, I just don't really want to be here any longer, to I'm going to go now kind of thing. So you've got an intensity level we can do as well. But by having pressed the start button on that, we then can pick up through their voice, the previous 24 hours. And therefore we can model the changes that have occurred both in chronic pain levels, emotional exhaustion, depression, anxiety, and see. Because if we can model 50 or 60 of these different events simultaneously, which we will do, because we'll pick up these different things, we'll be able to then make a prediction out of it, out of a model, out of our algorithms, and then test it against another load and see how accurate we are.
So you could, for example, have a scenario in the future where this is rolled out, and you've got a person who is using your app, and let's say hypothetically that the someone else, a caregiver or a health person is monitoring it, and that medical person could get a notification alert to say, hey, Joe Bloggs is indicating that Joe Bloggs in the next 7 days or 48 hours.
We're talking about within hours.
Okay, no, but that's, I mean,
the point. We're not looking weeks back, because the changes. What happens is you could be normal here, and within 3 hours, because a lot of people who commit suicide, and this is on the veterans in particular, I'm thinking about. There was a study done by the VA that they're okay, and all of a sudden, within 2 hours, they've just blown their heads off out of nowhere, and that's what seems to happen. So it's that early hours, those hours, just hours beforehand, which are absolutely crucial to know about. Not the predisposition of the person, he's had some bad news last week, or it's just got gradually worse. It's these intra-daily changes which are so crucial. And there's a guy called Craig Bryan at Ohio University, who's a veteran counselor, ex-military guy, who's described this in quite similar terms of these massive changes within the day. So using Kleiman's evidence plus Craig Bryant's, what we're seeking to do is actually provide the baseline for a early warning system.
Sorry, so changes through the day. Are you saying that the app would be monitoring your voice constantly?
Well, whenever you're speaking, we can sample it through the day, yeah.
Ah.
But during the what we're doing for the clinical trials, we're just going to take 5 data points through the day. So we just got it, because someone might be a hermit, doesn't speak to anybody. That's not going to be much use.
But I mean, as an operational app thing that is doing what you want it to do in the future, it would constantly be listening to you.
If you wanted it to, or you could just set it for whatever levels you want to, because I think some people wouldn't be comfortable with that for whatever reason, not with only processing anybody else's stuff. We also have an issue on GDPR, which is maybe something that raised people's attention, is that in America you've got different set of rules on this. So, and Apple, was it Apple? Yeah, Apple telephones don't like passive acquisition of data because they just don't.
Yeah.
They like to control their own space. Android don't care. But essentially what we think we can achieve with our system is that you could actually then embed it, if you wanted to, on like Amazon, on their Echoes. Alexa.
Amazon Echo, Alexa,
So when you're looking out, it's just sitting in the background.
And those fuckers are always listening as well.
And they are fucking listening, absolutely.
So I'm trying to picture in my mind. So probably most people want to use it if they're using it is, it would be like you say, those prompts throughout the day. So, hey Joe, they would have to say something to the app.
We just need 2 seconds of speech to get a
any
snippet.
speech.
That's it. Yeah, it's a grunt. This is the other thing, is it doesn't depend upon language. You can be non-verbal, like some people are. You go and that would actually we'll be able to pick up the call playing that. Yes.
Really?
Yeah, that's what it's all about. Because it's just literally what we've got. When people have those EEG things all on their skull, those electrodes.
Yeah.
Basically, we're picking up these very same things, but through the sound of the voice.
That is amazing.
It's electrical.
How come this hasn't been tapped into before? Or has it?
Because you only got someone as mad as me to think of a question way outside left field, which was looking for better measured care elsewhere, and then finding these steps along with. That's why I've just taken such a long time.
But there's been voice analysis done for other things, isn't there?
That's neuro-linguistic that's language analysis, semantic analysis. That's not the same thing.
This is a first in this application.
It is, and that's why when we go to the States to get it certified by the FDA rather, Federal Drugs Agency, not the the Fed, they're going to arrest me, is that they haven't got a classification for this. So we've got to have a chat with them to say, look, this is the evidence we've got. We think it's robust, blah, blah, blah. We think it can do this, both as a monitoring exercise, but also has these other characteristics as well. Are you with us on this one? And they say, no, please demonstrate it. So we've got to demonstrate it to the full statistical thing. So I've got a group of people who are going to work on this to make sure that we provide robust evidence with respect to that. But once we've created this is what's called a de novo application to the FDA, and it's not actually that long. It probably takes about 6 to 8 months, which isn't bad compared to the British system, which takes years.
Unless you've got billions, and they can make.
Well, no, it makes no difference. It makes no difference. The speed that FDA has a certain process which you adhere to. Here in the UK, it's not like that. That's the problem. In fact, the British government is bringing in a white paper which is going to come through, where they're going to create a system which mimics the American system for certification of software as medical device, amongst other things, because they realise it's a load of crap what they've got at the moment.
Interesting.
Then falling through just on the point about the early warning system, it's quite two things. These are the veterans I've spoken to. Well, we've done analysis, we've done questionnaires to UK and US veterans separately. We're talking about ones who self-manage in particular. The information that's provided, that's useful for self-managing, is that these people who previously want to self-manage consider it to have a significant clinical benefit, that they would then themselves think it useful to be able to speak to professionals, which they previously hitherto were not prepared to do. So that's a really important key behavioural change, potentially.
Say that again.
Right, okay, these guys, they self-manage.
I was still thinking about your son.
Okay. They self-manage, they hunker down, stoic values and all the rest of it, and either previous doctors have not helped, so you just try and get on the best you can. With this system, we ask them the question directly, with using Verenigma, would you like to share this with your partner? No, not particularly, thank you very much. I've got quite enough on my plate as I have, actually, rather than going to further discussions about what's going on in your head.
Oh, so giving the results, for example, or the indications to the partner.
But on the other hand, would you want to share it with a professional? These are people who didn't want to share it at all with anybody. The answer is 7/8 of those self-managing said they would.
Why?
Haven't got to the bottom of that, because here's my thinking on it, is that beforehand you're told by the doctors you've got PTSD, you've got anxiety, you've got depression, you've got chronic pain, and you're on the receiving end of that, okay? And therefore you might accept some of the stuff, you might not accept all of it, you might accept some. But if you've had a bad set of circumstances, you haven't got good treatment for one reason or another, you're not going to go back and put yourself in through that again, are you? That's why you manage yourself. But with this, you own this information. It's your information. And that's why you've got a re-empowering, or you've got empowering, because you've got a parity of arms. And that's why you can go and say to them and say, doctor, look, this is what's actually happening. What are you going to do about it? And we've also got the causal things as well. They say, okay, all of a sudden, the doctor, instead of being on a higher plane than you, is actually now supporting you in with this information decision making.
Going back to the blood test mention, it would be like, it's like in the same way as if I had the ability and the knowledge to be able to blood test, or the system to blood test myself and go, oh my God. And then it'd be walking to the doc and go, hey doc, check this out. Let's square it away, please. I'm deficient in flipping whatever.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Exactly.
Conscious that you are neglecting your child.
Somewhat.
I was joking, but obviously
he's okay. He's just wondering where he knows where I am. It's on the reverse position now. That's the trouble with these things, aren't they?
So you've got the clinical trials going on now.
They will be starting in about 3 weeks' time. We will probably need some more people. So one of the things, my call to action of people, is anybody who's interested in this one, wants to communicate with us and say, hey, we want to find out more or take part, I'd be only too happy to respond to them.
How do they get in touch?
My email, it's Verenigma, is the website.
I thought you were going to give your email. Don't give your email.
No, do that?
No, you can give it if you want.
I don't care. I mean, no one's going
to.
Okay. Anybody out there?
Is the website's accessible?
Yeah, but it's mine. It's Quinton.Richards@verenigma.com.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. And the website's live, verenigma.com. I'll put the link to the website the blurb of this.
Yeah, that's great.
Are you on?
I like to talk to people, as you know.
I can tell. Are you on social media?
I should be. I'm really bad at that. I'm being told I'm meant to be on it.
Don't be told that whatsoever.
Yeah.
Verenigma should be on there.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. Yeah,
if you can avoid it, if you're not on there, mate, avoid it.
I think I'm there with my children hanging around in the swimming pool on my shoulders. They have the photograph
on
LinkedIn.
I think you connected with me. Did you grab me on Facebook? No, LinkedIn. You grabbed me.
Did I?
You grabbed me on LinkedIn. And I thought you've got a family photo on there.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, age old. Yeah. I look about 50 now. I'm somewhat old, as you can tell.
But okay, email address verenigma.com is the main place. The website's really informative. I read it to you at the start, and you sent it to me before the podcast. Really interesting. Thank you. And
we've changed it in a somewhat slightly different way, because we're actually dedicating it to the military purposes. I mean, veteran purposes rather than broader based. But because we thought that it's the guys who are trying to look after themselves who are having the most trouble, and given that, particularly in America, 40% of people got the problems manage themselves. They think that VA is a shit show. Whether right or wrong, it doesn't matter. It's a bit like the NHS. Some people think it's really good, some people think it's really bad. In the UK, the percentages are even higher. The guys, and the girls that we got from the UK constituency, I think something like 60% were self-managing.
Of ex-mil?
Yep. If they've got problems, that they were managing themselves. Because that's what you do, isn't it? You might speak to friends as well, if you're in the confidence.
It shouldn't be what they do, though. Shouldn't be what you do.
But you might have had there's previous, obviously, that has caused the situation.
Self-managing, if you understand. No.
Well, some could do it because they can manage.
Yeah,
some
exactly.
Because they can't, and it's actually making it worse. So
exactly. Exactly. Yes, that's the point I was trying to get to. Thank you for. Thank you. Yeah. Exactly. Okay, we wrap it up.
Yeah.
Verenigma.com.
Yeah.
Verenigma.
Yeah.
Quinton Richards. It's been enjoyable. Thoroughly enjoyable.
Yeah, well,
really enjoyable.
I tell you what, I didn't realise it was going to be quite as discursive as it was, and you put me on the spot, and it's like, I hope my game's got to a sufficient pitch. Didn't claim too much.
You're welcome back up anytime, and good luck with Verenigma. It sounds super promising, really interesting.
I would like to be able to bring back results to you as they arise, and say, hey, if obviously there's something really, crucially sort of lifts the game.
Yeah, 100%. And also any future results on climate change.
I'll leave that to
Scotland.
the specialist.
Scotland.
I'll bring you
Northern Ireland.
I'll bring you full reports on that.
Right. Cheers, buddy.
Thanks a lot.